Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for coming to this Migration Policy Center's presentation. Let's get started. It's 2 minutes past 12. My name is Gerasimos Tsourapas. I'm a Jean Monnet Fellow here at the EUI this year, and it's a particular pleasure for me to welcome Professor Belachew Gebrewold, who's joining us from the Department and Studies of Social Work and Social Policy at MCI in Innsbruck, Austria, where he's a professor of international relations. I'll tell you a bit about his background and then hand it over to Belachew for what should be an excellent and exciting presentation. Briefly, his background is on European-African relations, African politics and conflicts, as well as migration. He has published extensively peer-reviewed articles, monographs, edited volumes, very indicatively, Africa in Fortress Europe and Anatomy of Violence, both with Ashgate, Global Security Triangle with Routledge, Understanding Migrant Decisions, and most recently, Postcolonial African Migration to the West in 2024 with Palgrave Macmillan. Belachew was also a member of the steering committee for the preparation of the United Nations Global Compact for Regular, Safe and Orderly Migration, preparatory progress in 2017. He was also a member of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, its informal advisory group on migration. Finally, he was also a member of the Migration Council of the Austrian Ministry of Internal Affairs from 2014 to 2017. And without further ado, Belachew, over to you to present us your work.
You are clicking the presentation, or what was? Okay, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the kind introduction. It is actually a project, an idea, I would say, which started 30 years ago, actually 32 years ago. I started to study philosophy and theology in Ethiopia, especially philosophy, and after that, we got chance, my colleagues, to study abroad. And what caused me to raise this issue again was how we chose our universities to study abroad. And why I'm telling you this is not because my background is so interesting, and instead it has a significance for my research. So there were choices for universities like Nairobi, like Bogota, like Lima, Sao Paulo, Chicago, London, Rome, Paris, and Innsbruck. And all of us, before me and after me, all of us were opting always for Western universities, no African university, no Latin American universities. And I was asking myself, why are we doing this? Why didn't we choose a Latin American or an African university? Why always the Western universities? So when I came to Austria, it was 32 years ago, I tried to discuss with some people, with African colleagues, and nobody understood why I'm questioning this at all. Said, okay, maybe it is a crazy idea, I forget it. But after I finished, I published the books which you mentioned. I was not very happy with my publications because it was always addressing migration from economic, political, or conflict and climate change point of view. And I noticed that there is something else, especially based on my own experience, why we opted for Western universities. So, and that is one thing. The second thing, where? Yeah. Okay, I can use also this one. And while looking for data and information for my books, I came across to these sayings. The first one, while researching for my first book, when I read this quotation by an African refugee or migrant, but they can build the fences as high as they like, they can have as many soldiers as they like, which is on Ceuta, Melilla. Nobody can stop us from getting through. I said, well, this is actually an interesting saying. There is something this person is saying and which we do not understand. And the second one was from UNDP, economic motivations closely tied to self-actualization in the sense that aspiration can only be fulfilled through departure from Africa. So what is aspiration here, which is a psychological terminology, and departure from Africa, that means, again, for me also psychological, Africa symbolizes something. So I wanted to understand what does Africa symbolize here, because this person is saying departure from Africa. You become a man once you have migrated from Africa Research Bulletin, which I got in 2019. What does it mean to become a man? And the reason behind this saying is, as you can see in the quotation below, before evangelization or Christianization, African countries have got rituals. I don't know whether some of you are anthropologists, maybe you noticed, and you notice that there are this kind of rites and passage rites, etc., to become an adult man or woman through circumcision or through different kind of rituals. You will be initiated and belong to the community. And now, because of Christianization and evangelization, these rituals are kind of seen as something, you know, superstitious, and you have to forget them, and you accept the Bible and Christianity, and you don't need those rituals. That's how we were told by the missionaries. And there is a kind of man crisis here, as we can see. The manliness is kind of in question. There is no job, there is no initiation rite, and who am I? At least migration gives me a chance to prove that I am a man by overcoming these, you know, dangerous places like the Sahara Desert, like the Mediterranean, like Ceuta, Melilla fences. So I have to prove as man, because at that time it was rather men who were migrating, not women, but nowadays women are also migrating, and I am going to come to that later on. So these things kept me busy all the time because I wanted to understand, and push-pull theories, which you said, the migration theories, the macroeconomic or microeconomic theories of migration, new level migration theories, etc., and all those things, they were, of course, extremely important, but they did not satisfy my approaches. And you know, I was telling you before, my approach is rather psychological and mimetic. Mimesis from Greece, from Greek, which means imitation. And there is something which is essentially human, not necessarily African, essentially human, to imitate other people, to imitate others. And I'm going to explain detail this and what opened my eyes after I came to Europe, studying and etc. When I came to this book, Frantz Fanon, who was from Martinique, from a small Caribbean island, who came to France to study, lived between 1925 and 1961. He was a psychiatrist, he was a philosopher, and etc. He was on the side of France during the Algerian War, but when he went to Algeria, he changed the side to the Algerian side. And he wrote this book, this very interesting, Black Skin, White Masks, which is used also in the post-colonial or post-colonial psychoanalysis, seen as one of the important books. Yeah? And he says the following, which revived in me the question which I asked before I came to Europe, why we were choosing European universities, not African or Latin American universities. When I read this book, which says the Black man entering France changed because for him, the metropole, which is Paris, is the Holy of Holies. He changed not only because that is where his knowledge of Montesquieu, Rousseau, and Voltaire comes from, but also because that is where his doctors, his departmental superiors, and innumerable little potentates come from. Let us now go and meet one of those who have returned home, you know, on vacation or for whatever reason. The new returnee, as soon as he sets foot on the island, asserts himself. He answers only in French and often no longer understands his own language or Creole. So here's wow, that is actually what I was looking for to understand the hidden causes of post-colonial migration. I'm not talking about all migration. I'm just interested in post-colonial migration, especially to the West, from the mimetic point of view, how the migrants, the post-colonial people try to imitate the colonizer in a paradoxical way, this paradoxical hatred and love relationship towards the colonizer. And then this brilliant young Nigerian author, she writes in her book, I highly recommend to all of you, Americana, is called the book, Americana at the end with H. And she says, they, that means Europeans or Westerners, would not understand why people who were raised, well-fed and watered, that means who are not affected by poverty or climate change or conflict, but mired in dissatisfaction, conditioned from birth to look towards somewhere else, which is Europe or the West, eternally convinced that real lives happened in that somewhere else, where now resolve to do dangerous things, illegal things, so as to live, none of them starving or raped or from burned villages, but merely hungry for choice and certainty. And this also goes in that direction. And as you can see, I first started with my different publications with classical literature in the sense that migration theory, economic, political, etc. But I was not convinced, and I tried to look for literature that means literature critique besides these economic or political reasons. And this book of Chimamanda Adichie contribute to this. Now, this book, which actually, you see it anyway, is the outcome of this, my own personal experience, personal story, which kept me busy for 30 years or 27 years. And the main points of this book, without going into details, because I would like to have that we have questions, time for questions. Three main points in this book are colonial subhumanization and exploitation. That means Africans were, I don't say dehumanized, because dehumanization is the negation of humanity, because the colonizer must colonize human beings. Otherwise, it does not make sense to be, in order to be superior, at least you need human beings, not animals. So the Africans have to be kept, at least to some extent, as human beings, not completely animals. Therefore, there is this need for the Europeans, for the colonizers, to keep them as still human beings, but less human beings, of course. That's why I'm talking about subhumanization. But Africans they have the desire to be liberated, not just historical liberation, but more importantly for me, the psychological liberation. That's why I'm arguing in this book, migration is a liberation movement. That means not necessarily a physical movement from A to B. Instead, you can still stay in Africa, a post-colonial being, but your mind has already migrated. If you see what people are consuming, what kind of lives that they are living, even epistemological, what are people learning, what kind of houses they are building. And that is, by the way, not typically African. Instead, all people, dominated people, behave similarly. And I will come to that later on. So this desire to migrate means to desire to be liberated from the dominance, historical, psychological dominance. And I took also this example from Exodus, from the first Bible, from one of the books in the Old Testament. Exodus, I mean, sitting near a Greek person, it is a bit very dangerous to cite how many Greek terminologies. Anyway, exodus, X means out, and odos means to journey or to leave the place, to take a journey. And not just because the Israelis left Egypt at that time, because of the operation in Egypt, but also there's this desire to start something, to decide by yourself where to be. And that is the symbol for me, a symbol of migration. And I like this German word, aufbrechen. I don't know how many of you speak, besides Julia, how many of you speak German. And that's, by the way, one of the reasons why I came to Austria to study philosophy in German, because I knew that the German language is so essential for philosophy, and it has so many interesting meanings. When I see this aufbrechen, which has many meanings, aufbrechen is, on the one hand, to start a journey, but also to break up, to break open something hidden, something invisible. And migrants are trying to break open this invisible fence, invisible veil, and to break through this. And what is this invisible veil? That means the subhumanization of Africans by the Europeans, by the colonizers. Even if historically colonialism has ended, but the legacy is still there. And many people ask me, but the solution for that would be to detach oneself from that, from the Europeans. But paradoxically, now it becomes more important from the mimetic point of view. That is the paradoxical thing. You do not always separate yourself from your oppressor. Instead, and paradoxically, you imitate that person, even his violence. So migration, therefore, as I argue, as a mimetic desire for recognition, who is going to recognize me, for first of all, who oppressed me. And that is my desire, that to be recognized as equal human being. Of course, the colonizer would not do that. If he recognizes you, the oppressed, he ceases to be. So he has to keep up this operation hiddenly, maybe with some extent. And there's this hierarchy from the colonizer, from the oppressor's point of view, it has to be kept up. And that is purely psychological. And we know that. And many times we say we are all for equality, but it is not true. No one of us likes equality. We would like to be always different. Some are extreme, others are less, some are hidden, some confess. But their desire to be not equal is always on us. That means that there is someone below us. And there is Albert Camus, which this famous French writer once said, either you have a woman or a wife, or you have a dog against whom you have the last word to say. That is this desire to have someone below us. And interesting here, what I'm talking about, scapegoat and mimetic violence, is that the post-colonial Africans, in this cycle of relationship, if we see corruption, if we see violence, if we see poverty, they have to scapegoat the West. They have to scapegoat the colonial time. They have to scapegoat now increasingly also Chinese or Russians or the Arab countries. They are also coming. And that is all very times very comfortable, you know, to find someone who is responsible. You can make responsible for your own failures and mistakes. Yeah? And unfortunately, this colonial time is being used, I would say abused, because colonialism was barbarity, that was European barbarity, which you cannot forget it. But it is really evil to use it in a way that you justify your own failures. Poor political institutions, poor economic institutions today, they cannot always be justified by colonial time. Yeah? So that's what scapegoating I am talking about. You know? I'm not justifying the Europeans, but I am trying to underline European, African own responsibility. And what African, many times, politicians and even academicians doing is that this repetition of mimetic violence, that means the violence Europeans did against Africans, they are doing the same violence to Africans themselves. And that is purely psychological. If you see, for example, Freud's The Future of an Illusion, you would read, you see the same thing, how Jews were behaving toward other minority groups, or in the Future of an Illusion. Even Freud himself had this kind of ambivalence. Yeah? I don't want to go into details. So Africans repeating the violence which was done by the colonizers against Africans and nowadays. Yeah? And that is, again, a psychological or psychoanalytical approach. So mimetic migration as a mimetic desire for recognition or belonging, it means to be recognized by the Europeans as equal human beings, which Europeans, of course, maybe hiddenly will never accept the same equality. So the West is, in this situation, both the model, because what we consume as Africans, post-colonial Africans, what we dress, even cosmetic industry, for example, there were cosmetic products being produced in the past decade. They bleach the skin, they lighten the skin, especially young girls used in many African countries to look a bit bright, to get a lighter skin. This is perfectly the outcome of colonialism. because to be human means to be white. Whiteness gives you a privilege. And at least I don't want to be as black as, those people, so that I could be a bit more human with this illusion of being recognized. Yeah. So to look like European, but at the same time hating Europeans because they were colonizers, that is one of the key points which I am trying to address in this book. So on the one hand, historical detachment, criticize the Europeans, but at the same time doing or imitating in daily behavior like the Europeans. And in chapter 8, address migration not necessarily because of poverty, conflict, and climate change, instead because of the three decreasing gaps which I observed. The first decreasing gap is the resource gap between Africa and the Europe, because many people who migrate have resources to migrate. They can afford to pay their journeys. Very poor people cannot afford this. That is what I say, the decreasing resource gap contributing to migration, the decreasing knowledge gap contributing to migration. That means educated people, informed people, people who have access to internet, to mobile phones, and to laptops and computers, they are most likely to migrate because they have more information about transit countries, about dangers, and especially about destination countries. So these are the three decreasing gaps that contribute to migration in this book. And again, this is the mimetic approach. René Girard, whom I use in this work as a theoretical basis, says that people imitate or struggle or fight the more they become similar to one another. It is not different people who fight one another, instead the similar ones, even without physical violence. This competition between Germans and Austrians, Germans and the Dutch people, there are many times jokes. How the Germans and Dutch people joke about one another because they are similar, not because they are different. And Austrians and the jokes are many times kind of deriding jokes. The similarity making kind of competition or hatred, not necessarily physical violence, but at least violence in the form of joke. And here, I don't know whether you can see it, it is my post-colonial migration as the burden, which means that this is actually not the latest version of my, I noticed that, yeah. Migration is as a liberation movement or deburden, which means that the fences which are being built are, on the one hand, the meeting point, but at the same time, the separating points. And here, which I mentioned at the beginning, they can build the fences as high as they like. They can have as many soldiers as like. Nobody can stop us from going. And as you can see here, they are climbing the fences. And at the end, they are two young people, after overcoming these, barbed wire, which is actually very dangerous, they are kind of celebrating and sitting on the barbed wire, which is actually unimaginable, which shows the inner determinedness. Yeah? And what I'm arguing here is, I'm just shortening, yeah, because so that we have enough time. It is not peculiarly African to imitate the oppressor, the West. It is not peculiarly African. On the left side, you have a picture of two young men sitting on a car. It is in Chicago. The author is Sarah Mahler, and she interviewed El Salvadorians, and they are homeless, El Salvadorians living in Chicago, and she conducted research. And they asked her to take a picture of them sitting on a car of someone else, and so that they can send this picture back to El Salvador, because they do not want to be seen as a failure. At least this illusion should be sent, even if the reality where I am living in Chicago is different, but people should have at least a good impression of us. And what does it mean? There is this pressure to be recognized as someone who has overcome the barriers, which I said before, as this, this manliness, this symbol of success. And this is not typically African or Latin American, also European. And Dostoevsky, one of my favorite writers, who was a very strong nationalist, in contradistinction to Tolstoy, very internationalist and peace-loving. And Dostoevsky went to France, Germany, UK, Switzerland, Italy, Austria in 1862, and he went back, wrote this book, Winter Notes on Summer Impressions, and says these following sentences, which I find in line with what I have been citing, for example, Frantz Fanon and others. Because of time, I cannot cite all of them. As he says, after all, everything, literally almost everything we can show, which may be called progress, science, art, citizenship, humanity, everything stems from there, from that land of holy miracles. The whole of our life, from our earliest childhoods, shaped by the European mold, could any one of us have withstood this influence, appeal, and pressure? How is it that we have still not been finally metamorphosed into Europeans? Now, how is it possible that the nationalist Dostoevsky is saying this? By the way, Tolstoy said actually the same thing for different reasons. He wrote this famous and big book, War and Peace, where he said three interesting things. When Napoleon, that means France, was fighting against the Russians, the Russian aristocracy and generals were talking among themselves, French. Not with the French people, but among themselves, the aristocrats and the generals. Secondly, they were all the time talking about how beautiful Paris was. And thirdly, they were drinking all the time champagne. And Tolstoy writes, 1,300 pages, Tolstoy, it is a fascinating book. And he was a real psychologist, Dostoevsky is for me one of the best psychologists I think you can ever have. I highly recommend to read as much Dostoevsky as possible. And that is what fascinated me in understanding not just post-colonial African context, but general human behavior. And I started with different authors to understand why this desire for recognition comes from. And the first one is, of course, Greece, Homer's Iliad, which is for me the eye-opener, especially the dialogue or the conflict between Achilles and Agamemnon before they left for Troy, for war. The rivalry between Achilles and Agamemnon, who were the Greek war leaders. They were fighting among themselves because of two young girls, who is going to have which girl as for fun. And then I continued with Cervantes, Don Quixote, and especially Shakespeare's The Midsummer Night's Dream, the rivalry between four people, maybe and Goethe's the Sorrows of young Werther. So all these people, just to mention some of them, gave me an idea. And besides African authors like Wole Soyinka from Nigeria, Chimamanda Adichie from Nigeria, Gurna from Tanzania, Ngugi from Kenya, and others. So I tried to approach post-colonial migration, not just from historical, not just from economic, but also from psychological point of view, and to finalize. It is already time. This is my conclusion. And the thing is, the desire for a struggle for recognition is in each one of us, in each human being. It doesn't matter where you are from, because we would like to be accepted and recognized as equal human beings. And from the Hegelian point of view, you are always defined. That is your identity. But you don't accept this identity. Definition is from the Latin term, which is a limit. It is a fine or limitation or a border, but there is this desire to break out of this border, to break out of this limitedness. And that is Hegel talking about this freedom as a negation. I want to be someone else, not defined by you, to be recognized as totality, as individuality, as a free person. And that is where I see this post-colonial African experience not to be defined by Europeans who you are, not just for self-preservation, as Hegel would say, but to be recognized as equal human being. Therefore, what I'm in conclusion saying is, it is a triangular relationship. I desire to be recognized. There is someone who is going to recognize, and I who is strive for recognition. So this is the triangular relationship. The desire for recognition, an idea, the one who is not giving me recognition, my opponent, and myself who is striving for recognition. This is the triangular relationship from Hegelian as well as from the mimetic point of view. So my final sentence, mimetic desire for being through recognition, but this recognition going to be given to me? I have to fight for it. And migration, by leaving the place where I am assigned to be, where I was supposed to be, physically by living as well as mentally by imitating. And Nikos Kazantzakis, again, another Greece, would say, I don't hope for anything, I don't fear anything, I am free. And that is actually the real freedom which sets us free, not the recognition as such. And the tragedy is, because I am reading the tragedy is that we are looking for or asking for recognition for someone who will never give us this recognition. Maybe as Nikos Kazantzakis would say, we'll step back as in Heraclion on his grave in Heraclion in Crete, this is written, I don't hope for anything, I don't fear anything, I am free. So thank you so much. I hope, I feel I took a longer time than I thought. But thank you for your interest, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
No, thank you very much, Belachew. That was fantastic. We have a lot of people in the room. We also have about 35 participants. I would say, let's start from the room, and anybody want to ask any questions? And I also encourage anybody online to type up any questions or comments, and then I can read them out as we go along. Yes, I'll start here. Introduce yourselves if you don't mind, and feel free to go.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I'm Lorenzo Piccoli. I'm a part-time assistant professor here at the Migration Policy Center. Thanks for this presentation, which was probably the most philosophical presentation I've seen as part of the series of seminars of the Migration and Policy Center. And I have two questions. The first is whether the ideas and the findings that you presented would apply to everyone equally, or whether there is also a gender component. So, you know, as I was listening to you, in my mind, maybe this would apply more to male people, but maybe I'm wrong. So, and the other question for you is whether you could pinpoint some concrete mechanisms where this mimetic desire for being that you talk about is created in the mind of people. If I can think of my experience, because you were also referring to how Europeans also dream of going somewhere else to be recognized. In the case of young Italians, that would have been the United States for sure. And that's because of all the movies that we consume. So I wonder whether there are similar cultural artifacts or experiences in the lives of young Africans, in this case, that bring them towards this desire for recognition outside of Africa and towards Europe in this case. Thanks.
Would you like to take one more, perhaps?
Yeah.
Yes, you can go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. I'm Eleonora Milazzo. I'm a research fellow at the Migration Policy Center, and I found your sort of key point about mimetic struggle for recognition very powerful, very poignant. I was wondering, sort of taking a step forward in the identity building process that you describe. I was wondering whether you also see some sort of identification with a third culture that cannot be fully subsumed under the culture of the destination country, but that is no longer the culture of the country of origin for the person migrating. So do you find that the final stage in this identity building process, if we could call it like that, is actually building a third culture, a sort of diaspora culture that doesn't fit into any well-established category anymore? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Shall I take one more or? Yeah, I think okay, sorry. You are moderating.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the presentation. My name is Stefana. I'm a first-year PhD researcher. And my question, I guess, builds a bit on the first one. Like, what do you think is the extent to which we can think of this framework, like desire for recognition beyond the African-European post-colonial context? And I'm specifically thinking that I come from Romania, and I think a lot of the dynamics that you described can also apply to a certain extent East-West migration, how East European migrants have desire to move to the West for, in a sense, it can also be seen, I guess, as a recognition. And building on that, in my research, I kind of tried to look at how Eastern Europe is becoming an area of immigration. And I'm wondering whether you think there is a parallel or whether we can think of this idea of what it is to be European, and like the European core is expanding a little bit in different directions, and then new relations are being formed. For example, I am looking in Romania at people from Nepal or people from Sri Lanka moving into Eastern Europe and these new systems being created. I hope that wasn't too confusing.
Okay,
Thank you.
Let's take these three, if you don't mind, Belachew, and then
yeah.
we have three more afterwards, and I would encourage anybody online to also type up any comments, and I can read them out to you. So go ahead whenever you want.
Okay. So thank you. Regarding the gender issue, I think it applies also to the gender issue. The liberty gap, which I mentioned before, in the concrete African context, 20 years ago, for example, there were no women migrated to the West or migrating at all. And this is because of the lack of freedom for women. But in the past decades, there are cases where increasingly from Horn of Africa, from Eastern Africa, for example, to the Arab countries, young women migrating by themselves because they have now the freedom to move. So it is, of course, organized through smugglers because it is nearer and they promise them jobs and etc. Yeah? But also to Europe, there are increasingly women migrating, young women migrating. So my approach is not just for men, it's also for women. Yeah. The mimetic one to the United States or in this case, Eastern Europe, of course, it is not going to be always the West. It is possible that in the future, Eastern Europe, and now in African case, China is also becoming a destination for migrants. Yeah, that is true. But at the moment, what we see, because the Western culture, Western consumption goods are dominant than culture and other goods coming from the rest of the world. For example, if I take Ethiopian example, where I come from, if there is a t-shirt or whatever written made in or coming from China or coming from Germany or I don't know, United Kingdom, people would prefer which comes from Germany or from United Kingdom to what comes from China, because it is seen as something higher quality. And of course, there are students nowadays, if you take China, especially from year to year, how many African students going to China is increasing massively. That is true. But still, the Western countries are the preferred destinations. If we compare, for example, scholarships for China and France is still, has the highest African students, not only in comparison with China, but also in general. So West is still as dominant. Country of origin thing is interesting. Maybe I give you an example from Turkish migrants in Western Germany. It was not a research by me, but a colleague from Berlin, Free University of Berlin. She is actually an architect who studied migration. The migrants from Turkey, guest workers in Western Germany, North Rhine-Westphalia, during their work time before retirement, they live a Turkish way of life, Turkish television, Turkish flag hanging out of the window, and Turkish food, Turkish furniture. In retirement, they go back and they do that just the other way around. They build even houses like in North Rhine-Westphalia. I mean, from the climate point of view, it does not make sense, but still, they build houses like that. It's not anymore Turkish flag, it's the German flag. It's not Turkish furniture, it's the German furniture. It is not it is BMW or Mercedes in front of the house parked in Turkey. And interesting is, culture itself is as a means of identification for a certain time. As long as you are in Germany, you have the feeling that you do not belong there. You are not welcome, you are not accepted, even if there is not always real open discrimination, but you feel uncomfortable, you do not come welcome. When you go back, but you have to look different. You don't want to be the same. And you have to feel superior. Again, this from mimetic and Savata point of view. And I would like to be recognized not as equal, but as someone superior by the locals. And this is also what happens many times. I come from rather modest background, poor background economically, and we could not always afford a long full trouser. And most of the times we were using shorts because it is cheaper than long trousers. And I was surprised some years ago to see that many Ethiopians coming from abroad using shorts. And I said, but how is it that they use them? Because they actually can afford long trousers, because I was thinking like myself, as I was used to think formally. But it differentiates them from the local people. The wearing of shorts differentiates them. You look different. Kind of superior. Why? Because you are imitating the West. And the more you imitate the West, you are superior. So these are the things which continue to give you an identity. Did I answer your question? Yeah. I hope I try to become as brief as possible so that others have also a chance to ask.
Thank you. No, you've raised all sorts of interesting points. I've got 3 questions from the audience here. Before I get to you, let me get to a few of the points that were raised online. And then feel free. Okay. Luca Bernasconi asks whether social media exacerbates mimetic desires or hinders them. So a question about social media, whether social media exacerbates mimetic desires. Another question asks about whether your position applies to all Africans across the board. And they say that this might not be so because identity building processes amongst Nigerian migrants, for instance, differs, especially in present-day Nigerians, because they're more informed by personal capacity enhancement than any other thing. So whether this position applies to all Africans across the board. There is a question from Mary Muyonga about whether what you're describing sounds like escapism drawn by the better that is elsewhere.
This like statism?
Oh, escapism. So are they trying to escape towards somewhere better? Is that what you're trying to describe? And she's reflecting on whether the increasing interest in Kenya, quote unquote, the origin country of Obama's father, and also there are many women from the West coming to meet, marry, and form families with the Maasai community. So she asks whether mimetic desires could be reversing as well in terms of return migration.
Okay, return migration, yeah.
And finally, if you can take one more from our audience online. You suggest that belonging operates across at least 2 target societies: migrants who want to belong to Western European societies, but they also want to sustain their belonging to home society. This means migrants face a dual challenge to establish and sustain their belonging. What does that say about migrant agency? And they're particularly interested in transconnectivity.
Mhm.
Let's stop here because
Yeah.
that's quite
Yeah.
a bit for you, and then we
Yeah.
still have 3 questions from here. Thank you, everybody, for
Yeah.
your patience.
Yes, of course, social media is per se something mimetic. I mean, I don't need to elaborate on this. Yeah, we are imitating human beings. That is, by the way, our nature. And evolution is imitation. It is nothing else. We evolved as human beings through imitation. And imitation is not always something negative. Even we learn language of others, it is also mimics itself. Learn of language, yeah. So social media, of course, is facilitating, it is enhancing, and therefore it is making it easier. What we consume is being transported by the media. If the neighbors know that, oh, this person has moved to South Africa, especially from my region, people move to South Africa or to Europe, and they see that the neighbors are living a better life than the others. So now they have to use media, social media, not just to learn from others how they are living, but also to find opportunities abroad, where are opportunities, and those who arrive, they post also in the social media what kind of life they are living. Many times, I know personally, for example, in Innsbruck, some refugees, asylum seekers living really a poor life, and they send pictures or post pictures in social media as if they are living as if they were living a luxurious life. And I know this personally. For example, some people could not buy food. They are working, but still they cannot buy even food. They send this money, what they get in remittances, and they beg begging for food. And then they post on social media a successful life. Whether this apply to all Africans, that was the question, I think from the Nigerian case. And it is interesting, actually, it was in 2011, there was a very interesting article written by 2 Nigerian migration researchers. Unfortunately, I don't remember the title of this. And how in these Nigerian writers idealize Western life and migration itself. And I dare to say, even if it is comfort, it is not very welcome to admit this, there is no reason to see Nigeria as an exception. And even non-colonized Ethiopia is exactly the same. The pattern is the same whether it's colonized or non-colonized. It is just because of dominance, the Western dominance pushing people to idealize Western way of life. It doesn't matter whether Nigerians or Ethiopians or whoever, the idealization of Western life is very, very deep going on in almost all cultures. And why were Chinese moving to the West for studies, for business, whatever? But now, of course, it is decreasing. Why were before the war Russians moving also to the West, and etc. We can take many examples. It is not here to offend anyone, and instead to analyze, to see the denied desire, as Freud would say, the denied desire is the strongest desire. We have to admit, as long as we deny those things, we cannot solve, or we do not understand them. So escape to some other places, I don't see it escape in a negative sense. And instead, again, to go back to my own terminology, starting with Hegel and with others, desire for recognition, even if it is a contradictory way I'm taken, it is a self-negating way, or even irrational way sometimes I'm thinking, it is part of this desire for recognition, because I don't want to stay where I'm assigned to. By the way, it reminds me of Rosa Louise Parks in Alabama in 1955, this Black woman who was told to leave her seat for a white woman or for white people on the bus, and she refused. This is for me also even migration in a metaphorical sense. No, I would like to decide by myself who I am and where I am. And migration is this. And that is, I would say it in an evolutionary, or in the negative, in a Hegelian context, because Hegel is very often seen as a supporter of authoritarianism and a slave-master relationship. But he has also very interesting psychological point here to contribute here. And return migration is an interesting phenomenon. As I mentioned before, like the Turkish case, return migrants to Africa as living in Africa exactly the Western way of life, the houses they have, even the languages, even the Chimamanda Adichie, whom I mentioned before from Nigeria. In her book, she mentions that migrant or the Nigerians do not want to eat normal potatoes. When they are in a Nigerian restaurant, they would like to eat chips because chips is a symbol of modernism, and normal potatoes are a symbol of backwardness because only farmers. I mean, I'm not talking about all Nigerians. She is also not talking about to defend her. She's not talking about all Nigerians. Instead, this is symptomatic what she is saying. To eat normal potato, which is cooked just in the water, it is a symbol of primitiveness. Yeah. So I think return migration, we could discuss many things about this. It is imported way of life by migrants or by diaspora people who are going back. It's actually living Western way of life. And paradoxes, these paradoxical or dual challenges which you mentioned, this is exactly the problem which we face. We do not exactly we want to be detached from our colonizer because he was our persecutor, but it's still our ideal. I mean, there is some kind of masochism in each one of us. The masochism in the sense that the one who has the power is the one who can persecute. The one who persecutes has some power. And this is something sexy. I mean, we do not want to recognize, and if you are interested in this, read psychoanalysis, read psychology, and where does it come from? And this applies not only on interpersonal relationship, but also intercultural relationship, historical relationship. Yeah. And the only way for this is decolonial theories are doing this to raise awareness. Decolonial theories from Latin America, who has already started, Paulo Ferreira from Brazil, Franz Fanon from Martinique, Aimé César from Martinique, and other psychologists and post-colonial theories who have already started to raise this awareness. This dual situation I mentioned before, so Sigmund Freud, the future of an illusion, is exactly the same thing. Yeah, so I think I talked a lot.
No, absolutely no. We have one last session in 6 minutes. I think we can do it, but you will be here right after as well.
I am here.
So anybody that wants to talk to the presenter.
We are going for lunch, but I'm here.
Thank you for your patience. Go ahead.
I was wondering about the role of education, this mechanism described, desire for recognition. And who think that this mechanism apply equally between the most educated and the least educated, let's say, the colonies in Africa, or does it change something? Because it could be the mechanism.
Yes.
It could be different ways.
I
would like to elaborate on this.
Yeah. Good. Okay.
Two more questions.
I think she wants to.
1 second.
Oh, sorry.
Talk about this idealization of the West and this desire for recognition. Can you say something also about how ideas of Europe, like Europeanness or the West, also change among African migrants once they are there? Like how
once they have arrived.
Yes, how their idea of Europe or the West kind of changes.
Okay.
Andrew, go ahead.
Thanks for the presentation. Andrew Geddes from the MPC. Just a very quick question, because I guess there are millions and millions of people who can't migrate, even though they may want to. I wonder what frustrated aspirations mean for the millions of people who are unable to do this, and socially and politically and psychologically, to have aspirations frustrated, and the meaning of that in the societies where they feel that they are compelled to live.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And one last point as well.
Yeah, thank you. 2 questions, but probably I'll only ask one. I wondered, when is this recognition achieved? because I study naturalization. I thought, okay, is when you receive citizenship abroad, is that the point where you achieve that recognition, or is it before when you have like economic status, or is it just reaching the land? Or did I understand you correctly that you cannot really ever achieve this? That's my question.
Thank you.
We have 5 minutes. So
Yeah, we have
pick
5
and
minutes,
choose.
so. Good. Education, it is interesting regarding education. It was between 2016, 2018, there was an Africa Barometer survey in 34 African countries, Sub-Saharan Africa, and about 48,000 people were asked. And interesting, the outcome was the educated people are most likely to migrate, not only educated people, but people who do not experience any poverty at all. Yeah? And that's why, because of education, I'm saying the decrease in knowledge gap between destination and origin, that means between the colonizer and the post-colonial man, is not necessarily preventing migration, instead even increasing migration. Yeah? And moreover, if we see post-colonial political leaders in Africa, prime ministers, presidents, very often, when they are sick, they are not treated in their own countries. They go to the West, to France especially, to United Kingdom, to United States. And it is interesting, this is not just a material issue. I think that is more psychological. Don't they trust their own doctors? If medical facilities are poor, why is that poor? Why is that? Because of mismanagement, because of corruption, because poor institutions? That is a different thing. Yeah. So this is again, for me, a sign of post-colonial identity crisis, or the colonial identity crisis. Because they still idealize the Western medicine, Western doctors. They don't trust their own people. I remember once we were with white guest from Europe and an African medical doctor, and we were going to medical center, and people were going to the white person, even if she did not have any kind of medical background. The medical doctor, who is Black, is only secondarily consulted because they were thinking only this white person can be a medical professional. I mean, so these are things which are hiddenly prevalent. And idealization of the West is going to decrease. Yes, it might decrease at some time, but still the idealization of the West is there because of education, because of, that means, education is coming from the West, material goods are coming from the West, democracy is widespread in the West, not in African countries. The idealization of the West is there, is widespread. At certain point, maybe sometime it is going to decrease. I don't know when. Unfortunately, I cannot say. Yeah, so it might change with time, with acceptance of oneself as equal and free human being. It might change. I cannot make a prophecy. And the frustrated aspiration, which you mentioned, yeah, it is really a big challenge, because there are also many people who go back as seen as a last human being by the locals, by family members, by neighbors. That's why many migrants would say, I'd rather die on my way or on my destination than go back, because a lot of money was spent to finance the journey. People are expecting that you are success, and your success is not just for you, but also for the family itself, because the recognition of the family in the neighborhood is extremely important. The opinion, that means the opinion people have about you, not you as migrant, but also as mother, as father, as brothers and sisters. Everyone is going to be proud of you if you are successful. If you are a failure, it is failure for everyone, for family members and for migrants. Therefore, this is the pressure under which people are living, migrant people on their way. And when is this recognition going to be achieved? An example, it was in 2022, there was this World Football Championship. It was Morocco against Belgium. Belgium, they played football in Qatar. And interestingly, Morocco won against Belgium. what happened in Brussels and in other cities, the Moroccan fans set shops in fire, cars in fire. And now how can you understand? And these Moroccans are not just first generation migrants, and it's the second and third and third generations. To your question, when is going to be achieved? Because even if they are born and raised in Belgium, speak French as Belgians, they have freedom to have jobs, normally, let us say, but still they perceive themselves as not, or they will never be as real Belgians, because you are talking about the when. And that is it because Belgians are behaving that way, not recognize them as equal human beings, or are they perceiving themselves as not welcome? This identity crisis emerges, according to this mimetic theory or my view, I think it continues for a long period of time. And people perceive them, I will never be accepted as equal human being. Maybe I look different because of, if you have Moroccan parents, etc., you will not look like, let us say, a European, a Belgian, or whatever. And you most probably you are Muslim, and these kinds of indicators will remain, I don't know for how long. And it is not an objective phenomenon. It is not necessarily because all Belgians are racist and always discriminating. You instead also about self-perception. How do I see myself? Yeah. So when it is going to end, I don't know. But we have to go back, and I would say, as long as you are striving for recognition by the Belgians or by Europeans, you are looking for this recognition maybe in vain. That's why I quoted Nikos Kazantzakis at the end. Don't hope for this recognition, just try to be free. And that is the only time, and it becomes completely personal and psychological. And you cannot achieve that by policy. This policy will not make you free, this inner freedom. It is only you who himself will make yourself free.
Yeah, we could easily go on for another hour, but unfortunately we're constrained by time. Let me thank you, everybody who came to this seminar, everybody online. We try to answer as many questions as possible. Dr. Gebrewold's book is out with Palgrave Macmillan, Post-African Migration to the West. So please pick it up if this was interesting. And in the meantime, let's give him another round of applause. And thank you very much.